Welcome to Housing for Huntsvillians, the podcast, a podcast about one couple's quest to eliminate homelessness in Huntsville by August 2026.
Hi, welcome to the podcast. Today we are joined by another special guest. This person we got connected to via another special guest of ours, Murray Edmondson, previous guest and friend of the pod. So today we're talking to Zach Anderson. And you're an attorney working here in Huntsville, and you work primarily with people who are older and struggling with disabilities. Is that right?
Correct. I'm an elder law attorney that focuses on that. Yes.
Fantastic. And how do you get connected to most of your clients?
Great question. It's mostly word of mouth.
Okay.
Elder law as a specialty was born about 25 years ago, so it's a lot younger of a field than, say, personal injury law or criminal or family law or something like that. And it focuses on the challenges that we have as a society, never having lived as long as we are living now. And that's a great thing. More years to make a difference, more years to have great friends and family relationships and get everything you want out of life. But with living longer comes challenges.
Totally. And we're aging as a population. So the percentage of people who are older is also greater than it's ever been, as far as I know.
That's exactly right. I believe the fastest growing segment of the population in terms of percentage increase is individuals 85 and over.
And I worked for a wellness startup, two wellness startups in SF. And in one of them, our whole focus was on cognitive health, and particularly cognitive decline, dementia, and Alzheimer's. Mm-hmm. And I was really interested in, and this may not be correct, but what I'd heard was essentially we've had a lot of advancements in keeping people's bodies going, but we've had way less advancement in terms of keeping people's brains young. So we're having a lot of people living a lot longer, but their brains aren't necessarily staying as healthy as their bodies are. Mm-hmm. So when it comes to elder care and elder law, my mind immediately goes to conservatorship and guardianship and things like that. So, and that's very related to what we're doing with homelessness in terms of okay, for most people who are suffering from a lack of affordable housing will fix the problem. Then there's a smaller percentage of the population who's going to need some kind of assistance, even with cheaper housing. Mm-hmm. And then an even smaller percentage of the population who affordable housing and some kind of subsidy is still not going to get the job done. And so that's where conservatorship comes in. So maybe we'll get around to talking about that. But today we wanted to have you on to talk about Section 8. And so you had said to me before we started rolling that a lot of your expertise on housing just comes from it becoming more of an issue for your client base. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. As we are living longer than we ever have before, and as individuals with more severe cognitive impairments of any age are living longer than ever before, we've had a situation where it used to be if you had a child who had some severe limitations, you wanted to take care of them during your lifetime, and that was, of course, very important. Now, there's a chance they will outlive you. That is something that did not happen 30 years ago, and it's great. They have more time to, enjoy life like we were talking about before, but it's created these new issues. Housing is one of them. That's typically not one of the pillars that an elder law attorney would focus on. Generally, the National Elder Law Foundation and NALA and other organizations are doing their best to change it, and I love that. But the question is, where do they live? Can a person live on their own? If they can't, where do they live? Of course, we think, family steps in. Doing this just in the 5-6 years that I've done it, no family's perfect, mine included. It's not always that easy. And we always talk about in elder law, who is the client is a big question. And one of the determining factors in that is whose interests are at stake, whose interests are sought to be protected. Most often it's the elder the person with special needs. Sometimes, though, and the rules acknowledge this, it's a family member who has to put their life on hold, their career on hold, sometimes their health on hold, to care for someone who needs care. So just all of these issues are coming up. There's so many options for housing. We need more affordable options, of course. That's the point of this podcast, as I take it. Section 8 housing is something that a lot of people don't know a lot about, and what you may know about it is about to change on January 1st of 2024 with some new regulations coming down the pike.
Yeah, and I know you wanted to talk about that specifically, and we definitely will.
Sure.
But just to back up a little bit, I want this as much as possible, and I'm not always very good about it, to be really friendly to people who maybe don't know a whole lot about whatever we're talking about. So what is Section 8?
Section 8 is a program that allows rental assistance for someone who doesn't have a lot of money. And the basic rule is rent, what you pay out of your pocket for rent, is capped at 30% of your household income. Income is unfortunately defined rather broadly. It's income from all sources. That actually includes a minor child if they have unearned income from SSI or something like that. So it's 30% of household income is where you're capped, but it's not a hard cliff. So as your income goes up, your portion that you're going to pay out of pocket for rent will go up because it's capped at 30%. So if your income goes up, what you pay your landlord, what you pay the facility is going to go up. But that's what Section 8 does at its core, is it caps your rent at 30% of your household income.
And so Section 8 money is from the federal government.
Yes, the part of the rent that is not your 30%, yes, it's subsidized, is paid from the federal government to your landlord, correct. Mm-hmm.
And administered via your local housing authority.
Correct.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So in Huntsville, obviously, that is HUD gives money to the Huntsville Housing Authority, who then gives money to the landlords who participate, who accept the vouchers.
Correct.
So the vouchers go to the family. A family qualifies, and they have a voucher, and then they have to find a landlord who will accept the voucher, and then HUD pays HHA, who pays the landlord.
Correct. And the tenant pays 30%.
30%.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And is it a 1-for-1? Like if the tenant earns $1 more, do they have to pay $1 more in rent?
It would be the percentage, so it would perhaps work out to something close like that.
Brilliant.
But yes.
What a great system.
Yes. But yeah, as your income goes up, the percentage out of pocket goes up that you pay. It's similar to SSI, the program for providing income to people who are unable to do that for themselves. We kind of have a weird system in this country where if the system is open about they want people to work their way off the system because the blessings of work and things like that. And there's some merit behind that. But, the problem is somebody could, maybe not get to the point where they work off the system, but they're working to reduce their benefit. The rules are designed that way so that people don't abuse the system. I understand the theoretical backing behind the rules. And, my job as an elder law and special needs law attorney is, these are the rules. We can engage in advocacy like you guys are doing. But, I help clients navigate the rules so that we stay within the bounds of them and live the best life you can.
Yeah. Literally penalizing someone for making more money by removing some of their subsidy is not how you encourage work. I'm going to go ahead and say that. And I think it's really ironic how we have a culture supposedly of savings and thrift in this country, right? You're supposed to save your pennies and then money follows money. But all of these programs, as far as I know, literally penalize you for saving. So if you do save, if you do acquire any assets because you don't spend all your money every month, you get less benefit as a result of that, which is just the definition of a poverty trap, which is frustrating. So do you have any idea like how many Huntsville residents qualify for Section 8 vouchers? And do you know like at what income level you would qualify in Huntsville?
I do not. I would be very interested in getting that data.
Do you know like roughly what percentage of your clients qualify?
For full disclosure, I started my law firm about a month ago.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah, so
wonderful.
now I
Congrats.
have. Thank you. I have had a lot of clients, through the years. One of the reasons I started my own firm was to focus more on the elder and special needs law side. Currently, I have no clients who are Section 8 eligible. However, the rules are about to change, and I'm not trying to pitch that and say we should talk about that now.
We
just
will.
to be clear, but I think every elder law attorney is gonna have more starting very soon because the rules are actually becoming more liberal. They're becoming more tenant friendly. They're becoming more. They allow people to have those benefits.
Awesome. Okay. So I just wanted to kind of talk about some things that I have read about Section 8 nationally. And then I would be interested in, if you have data on Huntsville, interject. If any of our listeners have data on Huntsville, we'd love to know. But nationally, only about a quarter of households who qualify for Section 8 vouchers ever receive a voucher. And I would assume the situation in Huntsville is probably similar. We probably have a lot of people who qualify who aren't getting vouchers. The wait time is often years to get a voucher if you do get one. So you're in a state where you qualify, as in you're housing insecure, for years without a voucher. And then approximately nationwide, 40% of households who are offered a voucher are unable to find an eligible unit with a willing landlord. So we've got a lot of people who qualify who don't get vouchers, and then almost half of people who qualify and get the voucher can't find a unit. So that is not a great system. And there are two main reasons in my reading of the literature for this mismatch. One is that there isn't enough money to go around, obviously. That's why every family who qualifies doesn't get a voucher. And one of the big reasons why there aren't enough funds to go around is that zoning makes housing assistance programs more expensive. You have fewer units, you have higher per unit costs. Each voucher goes less far than it would under a system where you had more units and the regulatory system that would enable more units. So for example, Amelia Irvine and Kevin Corneth in a 2023 paper simulated how increasing housing supply in the 11 metropolitan areas most constrained by local regulations would impact Section 8 housing assistance programs. And they tested increasing supply through streamlining regulation for a decade. So today, if we streamlined housing regulation, that means we upzoned these 11 metropolitan areas, what would the world look like in a decade? And they found streamlining regulations to produce new units at the same rate as the 90th percentile metropolitan area for a decade would reduce market rents by between 2 and 24%, which is quite a spread. But either way, it would reduce rents, possibly by almost a quarter. And the federal government would save $1.8 billion, which would be enough to help 18.6% more families with Section 8 vouchers. So that's the main problem in my reading of the literature, or a huge problem at least. Obviously, if housing is more expensive, it's more expensive to help each family secure housing, which means with the same dollar, you can help fewer families. And then the other issue, in my understanding, is that accepting housing vouchers, accepting Section 8 vouchers is a hassle for landlords. That, unfortunately, because we have too little housing and too many families looking for housing, especially in growing cities, renters are competing for landlords rather than the other way around, right? Mm-hmm. Which means if I'm a landlord, if I accept a housing voucher, I get market rate rent. I don't get any more rent than I would otherwise, but I get more hassle. I have to comply with more regulations. So in a market where I'm not competing for tenants are competing for me, why would I accept Section 8 vouchers? Like, that doesn't really make sense. So I was just curious about if that's something that you could or wanted to speak to, the kind of hassles around accepting vouchers as a landlord.
While that is something that I don't handle and don't have any practical experience on, I have colleagues that do, but you make a great point about the system sort of being designed in a way to have this benefit technically be attainable or technically be legal and on the books, yet not attainable. And I didn't respond to one of your points, and you picked up on it, and it's great. Section 8 is not an entitlement. You don't sign up and get it. When you turn 65 and you're receiving Social Security benefits, you are automatically enrolled in Medicare, at least the major parts. You're going to get a Social Security check. Section 8, you may be eligible for it, but you might not get it. That was a fundamental point that I failed to mention at the beginning. It's a fundamental problem with the system if there's not enough housing to go around. And thank you for pointing it out.
Yeah, of course. The one thing that I'll say with Section 8 is that, and I was actually speaking to a Section 8 landlord this week very briefly, but he said, the government always pays. You are going to get your rent check. So especially if you are serving an area of the market where payment is not always guaranteed, then you could be more convinced to take Section 8. But again, I think it's very much an issue of the more competition there is for units, then the less someone is going to want to be is incentivized to accept Section 8 tenants. So that's kind of what I wanted to say about it. And now I'd love to know what are the changes that are happening in January to the Section 8 program?
Sure. So I'll hit the high points. I will say the federal government has done a pretty decent job in not only attempting to get the word out about these new law changes, but they've also published some materials in particular, and you can just find this on the first couple of pages of Google. There's a fact sheet that's a PDF about just the changes, and then there's 2 slide decks from, I believe it's from HUD or the FHA, it's from the federal government, that go over some of the highlights. I've sort of taken the material and kind of created an outline that I think will be most impactful for the families that I work with and talk with. And some of those changes are as follows. The asset test. Remember, we're talking about income being capped at, or rent being capped at 30% of income, but HUD does a thing where they impute income from assets. And what they say is 100K, this is a new rule. This is a very, very new rule.
Okay, what does impute income from assets mean?
Impute is, let's say you have, let's start at the top, $100,000. If you have $100,000 or more in family assets, you do not get a Section 8 voucher. Does that mean nuclear
family?
It does. It means the household.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So like if I have 4 members and we each have a $25,000 car.
Car is exempted if you had a $25,000 bank account with cash in it. Yep. Okay. You don't get the voucher.
All right.
Mm-hmm. So 100K is the ceiling. Mm-hmm. What HUD does.
What does ceiling mean?
But like if you're above there, you don't get the voucher.
I see.
If you're above 100K, you don't get the voucher.
Okay.
We'll talk about what you mentioned, an exempt asset. We'll talk about, there are a few assets like a vehicle that are exempted. We'll talk about that in just a second. But let's hit imputation of income. This is unfortunately kind of not a super clear concept, but here's what it is. HUD says, if you've got $50,000 worth of assets, and the number is 50, that's not income, but we're going to impute some income from that, because if you have 50, we want to make sure this is going to people who are truly needy, is the idea behind imputing income. So what they do is they say $50,000 in assets. We either impute the income above $50K and add it to your income, which increases your rent, right? Because rent is capped at 30% of income. Or they take 50K or whatever asset level you're at, and they multiply it by something called the passbook savings rate, which is 0.4%. And whichever is higher, they add that to your income. Now, a couple things here. One, this is the most complex part of this regulation, and that's the first thing. And the second thing is I don't think people need to memorize that. If you're in a situation where that applies to you and the FHA is asking questions, yes, dig into it, know it, make sure you're being treated properly. I'd be happy to help or get a professional that does more of this work or something like that, maybe a social worker, I don't know. But the point is, if you're sitting on assets that are $50,000 or above, HUD is going to impute some income from those assets, so your rent is going to go up. That's the big point to know.
Okay.
So what is an asset? Well, an asset is not a vehicle. An asset is not something that you use to get to your job. Maybe if you have an impairment, maybe you need some type of equipment to do your job. That is not an asset. Believe it or not, under the new regulations, an IRA is not an asset. Now, if that IRA earns income and that income flows to the beneficiary, which it often does, then that is income. But the IRA just sitting there is not income. A big, wonderful change that has happened with this law is that a special needs trust is not going to be an asset for purposes of Section 8. The special needs trust is a trust designed to make a person with special needs, allow them to have the best life they can without jeopardizing government benefits, particularly SSI and Medicaid. Under the previous rules, special needs trust, Section 8 was kind of the dark area. It just didn't work. The rules are changing. They're going to work. The rule is, and the upshot is, special needs trusts are not a countable asset for Section 8 purposes, but here's a little bit into the weeds. If the trust is not revocable, can't change it, can't take it back, revoke the whole trust. If it's not revocable by or under the control of anyone in the household, then it's not a countable asset. It doesn't impute any income to you. So if you've got $75,000 in a special needs trust, that's not going to impute any income to you for purposes of Section 8, which means it's not going to increase your rent. Now, if there are assets in there earning income, Rob, did you have a question?
Oh, no.
I'm sorry. If there are assets in the special needs trust and they're earning income and that income is distributed out to the beneficiary, that's income and that's fair game. But it used to be we would have a special needs trust with a fair amount of money in it that would cause people's rent to go up. And we basically couldn't deal with Section 8. It was off the table because it wasn't a viable housing option. We used to just have to keep the money in the special needs trust and just say, well, Section 8, sorry, that's not an option. It's going to be an option now. Now, navigating which housing provider is best for each person, that is something that I would absolutely delegate to a social worker. Hopefully you have family members who can help, but not everyone does. But as far as, the option being on the table for many of those in the senior community and the special needs community, this is going to be a new option. But, this is going to be new rules for the FHA as well. So I don't know if we're going to have more or less audits. I don't know if, sometimes when you work with government agencies, sometimes, especially if the rules are new, they'll get the rules wrong in complete good faith. They're trying. It's just some of the stuff is hard and it's all new. So that's uncharted waters that we're going to go through together. But the rules have become more pro-special needs, more liberal, and they've put an option on the table that wasn't there before. They're still restrictive, to be clear. They are more restrictive than most would like, but they're better.
Well, okay, yeah. Be right back, having an aneurysm. I'm just like, we have a system where 75% of people who qualify don't get the benefit. And again, who qualifies is, complicated. But even under the restrictions, vast majority of people who qualify don't get the benefit. Of the people who do get the benefit, 40% can't take advantage of it. So we're expanding who's eligible, but we're not increasing the supply of homes. So this is just going to exacerbate the crisis. No one is different people will get housed, but more people will not get housed as a result of this.
It's a great point. It's a good global argument for sometimes issues are more global than we might think. For example, Medicaid, healthcare. The cost of healthcare, even if we expanded Medicaid, which every state should, including Alabama, 41 states have, if the cost of healthcare is still going up, what about people who can't get on Medicaid? Especially in this state where we have not expanded Medicaid and the restrictions are fairly, they're substantial. So it's, we talk about Medicaid reform and some parts of the law affecting the elderly and disabled have become better with regard to Medicaid. But if the cost of health insurance and health care keeps going up, what good does it do practically? That's a great point. Issues are much more global than just this is a Section 8 bucket. This is a healthcare bucket. This is a elderly or Medicaid nursing home, whatever bucket. That's a great point.
Thank you. The other thing that drives me insane is that what is the point? Why do we have Section 8? I have my theories, but we would think it would be to meet the need for affordable housing for people for whom market rate rents are out of reach because their incomes are too low. Okay, fair enough, We have soup kitchens. We have, for people who can't afford food, let's provide housing to people who can't afford housing. But the goal should be there are two kinds of people, broadly speaking. There's the kind of person who will never be able to afford housing without assistance. That's just that's where some people are, and that's where they're always going to be, and that's okay. We live in a society. We take care of those people. And then there are the people who, and this is most people who need assistance. This is a situational problem. They need help for a certain period of time. They need to get a foothold, and then they can get themselves in a position where they can afford housing with market rate rents without assistance. It would seem like a sane system would make it as easy as possible for people who need help to get help, and then as easy as possible for people who are capable of not needing help anymore to get themselves in a situation in which they don't need help anymore. And then you solve the problem of the program being too expensive by getting people out of the program who don't need it anymore. But instead, it seems like we've created a system that will never actually come close to solving the problem of meeting the need of housing for people who can't afford market rate housing. Makes it very complicated to even figure out if you qualify. Makes it very difficult to get it. Makes it very, very difficult to get out of a situation in which you need it. And spends a lot of time and money creating, modifying, enforcing, and fighting over these rules in the system.
A couple things. One, Medicaid's worse. The Medicaid laws are actually way more complex.
We're not doing medical for Huntsvillians. Like, I have no expertise. No, thank you.
Though
I will say, statement of need laws need to go. No.
I sort of forgot where I was going there, but one thing that you had said that I think maybe at least a more sub problem, so to speak, is if somebody just needs Section 8 for a period of time in their life, that they don't need it forever. I'm not a landlord attorney. I don't have any landlord clients, but I wonder if that transition is a cost that they have to eat. And they look at it as, well, when we transition tenants, we're going to probably miss some rent because we probably can't get the new tenant in the same day, right? I don't think that's how that works. And, they could be mad and leave things on the wall, or they could just in complete good faith. I've moved residences before, sometimes wear and tear. I mean, the walls get scratched. These things happen. So I wonder if maybe that's part of the problem, and that's a tougher one to solve, is just if you have less constant tenants, the federal government's check cashes. But if you're having a different tenant every time, do you have to leave something open for 4 weeks? Do you not like that? I'd be interested to hear their perspective. They're certainly, a player in this space. The last thing that I remembered in response to your point is, the other way to do some of this, at least with regard to healthcare, and I promise I won't take us down this rabbit hole, is single payer. We could scrap the employment /Medicare /Medicaid system and all of its rules and all of its holes. Medicare doesn't pay for dental. Medicare doesn't pay for vision. Medicaid has its holes as well. You got to have $2,000 in assets to qualify. We could strip all that down and do single payer. The prospects for that, we were hearing about that. It was going to happen in the 90s.
Right.
So there's an alternative. It's interesting that we are the most entrepreneurial country in the minds of many, yet on things like housing and healthcare, we have got some regulations that are anything but kind of friendly to, they're not streamlined and basic and XYZ.
No, they are not entrepreneurial by any stretch of the imagination.
And they we patchwork things. We change the Section 8 rules to make them more liberal, like we're doing now. Is that in itself a good thing? 100%. But we never say, you know what, the system's not working. Let's talk about single payer. Let's talk about something
I've
totally
got something
different than
kind
Section
of
8.
similar to that. And this is what I've been advocating, and this is something that HUD is actually experimenting with, is replacing public housing and Section 8 and low-income housing tax credits and all these programs that subsidize housing or subsidize landlords by giving cash to families. Why is the government even involved in providing direct services or being a go-between between families and landlords? Give families who cannot afford housing at market rates cash. And there are a lot of studies that have come out in the past, decade, showing great results, that when you give families cash, they know better than the government what they need. And it eliminates all these problems of, will a landlord accept the voucher? Well, it's cash. Every landlord's going to accept a check. And there's actually, with cash, no way to know where the check comes from. So a landlord can't discriminate against a person on public assistance.
Yeah. I actually lost my train of thought. So continue. I apologize.
You were going to say you love the idea and you fully support cash assistance.
Thank you. That actually, the literature that I have examined, it's been a win in Alaska. It has been a win in Alaska. It's not for housing. It's a more basic kind of universal basic income structure. Even the economists who lean more to the right, I believe the overwhelming weight of the literature is that something like that has worked in Alaska. Now, I know Alaska does not look like America geographically, demographically, economically. I get that, but it's worked in the small area we tried it.
I'm not familiar with the Alaska study specifically, but I have read about other studies of cash assistance, and they've been very promising. And it's very funny. I mean, I know, especially since like 2016, what's coded left and right is very confused. But when I was growing up in Alabama, in Huntsville, the right believed in free markets, economic freedom, property rights, and essentially the idea that central planning didn't work as well as spontaneous order, that the people on the ground know what they need, they know how to get their needs met, they know how to effectively, efficiently deploy resources in a way a central planner cannot because they're too removed from the situation. Cash assistance is just that idea implemented, right? The idea that a central planner, a government bureaucrat, knows what a family in, bumfrick Iowa needs this week is absurd. They don't know. It takes away the freedom of the family. It removes efficiency from the system. It creates all kinds of opportunities for corruption where, you can spend your WIC on this, but not this. And so, the whole infant formula problem was a result of corporatism in those kinds of systems where if you just gave low-income moms cash, you wouldn't have those inefficiencies and problems. And so anyway, yeah.
Yeah, put parents in charge of families. Put families in charge of families, whatever family looks like. Yeah, instead of having somebody in an office at a government office doing it.
And how interesting that the right is like, families need to be in charge of what their kids read, but not in charge of how families spend their money? How does that make sense? Anyhoodle.
Yeah, central planning in some areas, central planning not in other areas, I suppose.
Very, very selective. All right. Anything else you want to say about Section 8 or the new rule changes for our audience?
I believe that is it. I did not mention just one quick thing. There are deductions from your household income for children, unreimbursed medical expenses. It's $480 for each dependent. Okay, so each dependent you have, like a child, will bring your income down for Section 8 purposes by $480. And if you are an elderly or disabled family as defined by HUD, so we have somebody in the household, elderly, that's 62 or older, or disabled for purposes of the Social Security Administration, you get a $525 deduction. So that will help a little bit. And then just in case anyone was thinking about trying something clever, there is a 2-year look back period. So if you have $1 million and you give it to whomever and say, give me Section 8, the government will not give you Section 8. So just be aware that there is a 2-year look back period. But that's all I have to say on that.
My listeners, I need you to understand how much I love you because this makes me want to die. I'm so enraged. This every cent that's spent on looking back at a family's income is a cent that's not going to a family who needs it, and that makes me want to murder. So yeah, tell us how about yourself, your practice, who you serve, who should reach out to you, what you can do for them.
Sure. I'm an elder law attorney here in town. AndersonProtection.com is my website. I've got a lot of free resources on there about special needs trusts, about protecting inheritances, but the most resources are for families touched by special needs. Those resources are totally free. They're just a PDF click on the website. They're not email walled, although you're welcome to send us an email at any time. You just click on them. You can print it right there. We've got one that's more of an overview of special needs planning, and then we've got one that I call a deep dive that really gets into the weeds. If you enjoyed the parts of this broadcast that we went into the weeds, you might like that one. We talk about income taxes of special needs trusts too. I know that's a very popular, cocktail party discussion, but lots of free resources on there. We help families prepare for elderly times in their lives, elderly family members. The old saying is estate planning is a part of elder law, but estate planning asks what happens when you die, and elder law asks what happens if you live. So that's kind of the way we look at it. We got a lot of free resources on our website. Give us a call. We'll talk to you. We don't charge for consultations like that, just to see if we're a good fit. And if we're not a good fit, we'll send you to maybe a care manager, someone like that, maybe a professional trustee who administers special needs trust, because we don't do that part of it.
That's awesome. We're going to have you back on, because the overlap between homelessness and disability and special needs is extremely high. And it's also true that there's a the population of people experiencing homelessness is disproportionately older as well in the United States. So lots of overlapping interest here. And expertise. So thank you so much for coming on. We'll have to have you back. I want to talk about conservatorship. I want to talk about disability. I want to talk about all those things. But yeah, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much for having me. There's a lot of great things happening in that arena with supported decision-making and ABLE accounts. So would love to talk about that some other time. Thanks for having me, guys.
Awesome. And thanks for listening.
Thank you for tuning in to Housing for Huntsvillians. This podcast is a project of Huntsville New Liberals. Sign up for our newsletter and RSVP to our monthly happy hour at huntsvillenewliberals.com.